Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us in another Daily Objective. So today we have with us Aaron Smith. Aaron is a fellow with the Ayn Rand Institute, and he has been my teacher in the Objectivist Academic Center for 3 years. And I'll talk about the Objectivist Academic Center towards the end of the show, but it's an experience that was so useful for me. And from all the things that we discussed, one of the highlights for me was the discussion we had about Stoicism. So Aaron is interested in Stoicism, and today we're going to discuss Stoicism, and for 2 reasons. The first reason is because it has experienced quite a resurgence in popularity. It has been quite present in circles around entrepreneurs, people who are interested in self-development. So the first question is, why is Stoicism big? And is it a good philosophy? Is the second question. But also some of its characteristics, in a way, make it a philosophy that in some people's mind is not miles away from objectivism, in the idea that, look, it's a philosophy for life. It teaches you how to live a good life. So it's not for the ivory tower. So it will be good to understand what are the good things in Stoicism and what are the bad things in Stoicism. And with us also, we have Mark Pellegrino. Mark, thank you very much for joining us. So,
thank you.
A man who, he's interested in virtues, in living them. So hopefully we're going to have a good discussion. So, Aaron, let's begin with the basics. So, is Stoicism a coherent philosophical system which we can describe in a few words? So, we had this moment, for example, when someone asked Ayn Rand, can you describe objectivism standing on one leg? Is there such a version for Stoicism? Can we describe Stoicism in a few words? And what are the basic tenets of that philosophy?
Yeah, I think you can do that. I think I can do that. I would put it as that the central goal of Stoicism as a philosophy is to live in accordance with nature. You can unpack that a little bit by saying to live in accordance with human nature and with the nature of the whole universe, in effect. And that the essence of virtue is to do that, to act in such a way that you are living in accordance with your own nature as a human being and with the nature of the universe as a whole. To act in contradiction to either of those is, in effect, vice. That's where you're going wrong. And now what requires unpacking, I think, there, because, who wants to live out of sync with human nature? Who wants to live out of sync with the nature of the universe around you? That sounds like a recipe for disaster, and it is. But where the unpacking is necessary, where you got to put the other foot down and stop standing on one foot, is what is their conception of human nature, and what is their conception of the nature of the world around us? Because those are the items or the features of the world that we have to be in harmony with. So a lot of it will depend on what do you think human nature is, and what do you think the nature of the world around you is, because that then will condition what it means to live in accordance with nature.
Okay, so why then is it so popular among circles that are interested in self-development, but also lately interested in masculine values, on things such as experiencing hardships, getting used to hardships? So there is this trend out there that says, look, life has been without meaning. We all become very soft and we've become decadent. And the way out of it for many people has been Stoicism. So what is this angle to Stoicism that in a way attracts the same audience as people like Jordan Peterson, who have this message that, look, your life can be something better than the mess of nothingness that it is for many people? And many people feel that their life is like that, and they look for an alternative.
Yeah, so I'll address that from 2 angles. One, just in general, the notion of why is it popular? One reason, and I found this because I've read either all or parts of some works by modern Stoics, like people writing today about this is what Stoicism is, this is your path to happiness and whatever. And what you find in those books is, in the introductions often, is people who are looking for some sort of philosophy of life, some sort of approach to living, which is not religion, something kind of a secular worldview, but something that builds in some sense of meaning or morality into it. So it takes morality seriously, and yet it's not religious, it's secular. And Stoicism fits that niche. So it's like, this is an approach to life. It's not built, it's not connected with the church or some sort of organized religion, but it has a spiritual dimension. What I mean by spiritual here, I mean concerned with things related to values. And so it fits that niche nicely. Though I think there is much more of a religious tone to Stoicism in the ancient world. But the other thing, which ties into the Jordan Peterson kind of crowd, is that one of the major things that Stoicism offers people is how to be impervious to, or less vulnerable to, maybe that's the better way to put it, less vulnerable to suffering. And they're not talking about you break a leg and you feel physical pain. It's about emotional pain, stress, anxiety, fear, all sorts of the kind of these kind of emotions that kind of bring us down. And a lot of people do, in fact, experience those things. Part of it is that's a natural thing to experience in life sometimes, right? All of our lives contain that at some point. And some people's lives contain much more of that. And this offers a remedy. It says, look, if you can get your values structured in the right way, you'll know what to worry about or what to care about and what not to. And if you do that right, you'll find out there's a lot of things you shouldn't be worried about, not concerned about, not fearful of, not anxiety ridden about, and you can sort of shave off all those things from your life if you can order your judgments correctly about values. If you can narrow that to the set of things that are truly important, you'll find that a lot of this is BS from the perspective of your own happiness and well-being, and that it's not worth it to worry about these things. And they have certain psychological techniques to use, which we could get into, but to help alleviate suffering. And I think so that ties to the Jordan Peterson, life will knock you down, life is pain and that sort of thing. And I don't mean that everybody who's interested in Stoicism has that sort of view, but for one who does, or for one whose life feels like that, this is offering some kind of a remedy for that.
I'll play a bit Stoics advocate here. So both of us here, me and Mark and Aaron, I guess, we have been critical of this attitude of many people saying, oh, government is ruining my life, Trump has brought me depression, or that the socialists are taking over and that's why I cannot flourish. So wouldn't we say that the philosophy that says, look, actually some things are in your hands, and it's not the mistake of the government, it's not the mistake of capitalism or whatever, different people or patriarchy or whatever. So there are things that you can control and there are things that are out of your control. So doesn't this remind you a bit of this metaphysical versus man-made dichotomy that is to be found in Objectivism? And isn't this a healthy break from a culture that says everything is out of your control, everything is determined, or if it's not determined, the system is stuck against you?
Well, so the common denominator there between Ayn Rand's perspective that she offers in her article, The Metaphysical versus the Man-Made, and the kind of perspective that you get from Stoicism is that, and this is correct, this is true philosophically and valuable, is that you do have to distinguish, and I think it's important to distinguish in your life, both for your psychological health and for your just existential life, the conduct of your affairs and so on, the pursuit of your values, is that you have to clearly identify what kinds of things are up to you and what aren't, what kinds of things over which you have a direct or indirect control, and the kind of things which you don't have any control. And because and this is sensible, right? So if there are things over which you literally have no control, the direction of blood flow in your system, the orbits of the planets, the fact that you have to think if you're going to survive, right? These are just facts of the world. There's not, like it or lump it, those are facts, and you can't spend your life worrying about that or kind of moaning about it. Those are things you just have to accept serenely. These are facts of the world. And then the part that you can change, well, that's the part over which you have control and you have responsibility. So this is an issue where these are the things I can make these changes with either with regard to my character or with regard to my wife or my relationships or my job or, you know, whatever it is that there is an aspect that you can control. There is an ambiguity, I'll put it that way, in Stoicism with regard to how to understand what is up to us or what is in one's control. Because for Objectivism, it's clear and unambiguous that she's an advocate of free will. And she doesn't mean anything mystical by that, but just that you have the causal power to initiate action in consciousness. You can initiate thought or let it languish. You know, you can turn on your and make use of your mental resources to devote it to the process of perceiving reality, to grasping causal connections. To, you know, you can turn on your mind and use it and initiate it or let it drift and so on. So you do have this power, and it's a huge power, but it's certainly not unlimited. There's all sorts of stuff you can't change and have no control over, right? But when it comes to Stoicism, and we'll probably talk about this more, but they will often say that there are some places, well, they'll quite often say that there's some things that are up to us and things that are not up to us, and you have to act accordingly. But they are also determinists. So their view, and there's a whole sort of fatalistic fatalistic is not the right word. There's a whole network and chain of causes, which they call fate, which is unbreakable. And so there's a sense in which what they give with one hand, they take away with the other. So it is empowering. And I think this is part of the appeal of Stoicism. It is empowering to say, look, you can do it. There are things that are up to you, fundamentally up to you, and you can change them. And then there are things that you can't. So we're stressed about those. Don't worry about those things. But the things that are up to you, you can bring it in your control. You can grab the wheel and direct your life toward a better life. Now that's what's inspiring, right? That sounds serious, right? That sounds like good advice. That's not bad self-help. But then if you simultaneously have a deterministic worldview, and by deterministic, I don't just mean it's cause and effect. I mean that it's fixed. Then what does it mean that something's up to you? Now, I mean, this is a problem philosophers for centuries have wrestled with. So it's not a trivial issue where you throw out a one-liner and you defeat the argument or something, but that is a problem, or at least I take it to be a problem within their system. It's a form of, I think, in the end, incoherence. So while I applaud and I think it's right to think highly of the view that you have free will, some things are up to you, and here's what they are. Take control of those. The other stuff, don't beat yourself up about it, that there's something good about that. But then you have to have a coherent conception of what it means to have volition or free will, if you want to call it that. I mean, because there's also, if you look at later Stoics in the Roman imperial period, people like Epictetus, and I think I would say he's the best in this regard with respect to his emphasis on what's up to you. Because you get less of the impression from Epictetus that you don't really have anything up to you. He lays more stress, I think, than anybody else on that point. And whereas if you read Marcus Aurelius, for example, he'll talk about things like what's up to you or what's not and so on, but you really get the sense of a heavy fatalism in this. So if you read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, I like this translation, by the way, by Robin Hard. This is wonderful reading, by the way. I mean, I'm critical of Stoicism, but I'm very interested in the philosophy, in Hellenistic philosophy in general. Yeah.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of determinism again, could it be that Epictetus was a slave and saw an evolution to his life from one thing to another and was able to then pinpoint much more easily what was within his control and not, whereas a guy like Marcus Aurelius, he's an emperor, he's sort of stuck in a particular role, and which endows him with a certain fatalism, in that lots of things are coming at him that he really can't control. It's not like he can step down and become a peasant. I guess he could, but they're coming from two completely different roles in life, where one can see an arc and the other can't see an arc. What does that have to do with determinism? I mean, does this say anything about determinism?
Well, there's a philosophical issue and a psychological issue. I think it's psychologically plausible, the story you kind of projected out on them, that Epictetus, as a former slave, has a perspective on the things he can control and what it means to feel free, where it's not necessarily existential freedom. Like his view ultimately is, if you're a slave, you can be just as free as if you're a free man. That the freedom, from a philosophic perspective, the freedom of a Stoic isn't dependent on whether you're a slave or whether you're in chains or whether you're in prison or whether you're an emperor. So philosophically, it's freedom from wanting things to be other than they are. And that's the kind of freedom. It's not about, I think ultimately it's not about control. So in the free will determinism problem, there's an issue of control. Like, do you have causal power over something like your thinking or whether you think or not, or whether you act or not? I think that's less what Epictetus is focused on. It's more about freedom from wanting things to be other than they are. And if you can get to the point where you can be just as free in prison as you are running around in a meadow, then you've isolated yourself. But let me finish. I'm going to come back to you. But and then the issue with Marcus, I think that's also psychologically plausible, that you feel yourself hemmed in various ways. That, you know, and you read it, but you get this a lot in the meditations. Is, you know, he's out on campaign. He's sleeping on a camp bed. It's cold, or on a military campaign. He's like, you know, he wants to stay in bed. You know, and it's like, you got to get up. You got to play your role, be a man, be a Roman. You know, you have a job to do. Nature carved you out for a role, and you got to do it and get out. You've had enough. You know, you're going to deal with people who are surly, disrespectful, but that, you know, this is life. Don't expect it to be different, you know, and there's always this sense of obligation around him. And yeah, I think that there's something to that psychologically, but when you step back and you look at the issue philosophically, it's, do you actually have a causal power to affect the way things happen, which is not simply the transference of all the past prior events, you know, to today? Like, can you impact the chain of events in a way where you're just not another causal, like, cog in the step? And then that's a problem philosophers, whether they're Stoics or not, have to grapple with and come to terms with.
Now, I think I have another question, Nikos, unless you wanted to jump in.
Go on, Mark, go on.
Oh boy, I think I might have forgotten it. Is there a place for that kind of stance in the world? For example, is there a place or a time, particularly, let's say, tragedy, or if there really is nothing you can do other than initiate thought and a perspective on things, is there a time when that mentality of I don't want it to be other than what it is actually a very healthy phenomenon? I mean, I can think of extreme times, like Epictetus was a slave. There was certainly nothing he could do about that. There's certainly people in the world who are in similar conditions. I would probably admire the Frederick Douglass, who was constantly yearning to be free and did something about it, over the guy who just sort of says, this is my lot and I'll just learn to live with it. But is there a place where that is psychologically and philosophically viable?
Yes, definitely. And in my view, so long as it doesn't become metaphysical. And I think it's metaphysical with the Stoics. So let me say what I mean by that. So you can be in a position in your life where there's so much pain around you, suffering, and it could be in part physical pain. So if so you have an injury, right? And you have constant physical pain. And also you've got just a lot of things stressing you, people close to you died. And at some point you're doing triage psychologically, right? And you're thinking, look, I'm not going to worry about these things. I mean, some of these things I just have to let go. I have to get myself into a place mentally where it won't hurt me, because I can't live with pain. It can't be pain. Life can't be pain. And that's a rebellion against pain. I think from the perspective of a living organism. My life can't be pain. And if it gets to the point where that's basically what it is, in the service of life, I mean, you have to find a way to cordon that off. And I think so, whether you're in prison, you're on some unjust charge and you get a life imprisonment, or you become a slave, or you're trapped in a dictatorship, or whatever it is. I mean, there are positions where, but then when you look at what does that mean though, it's you care about your own life. You don't want a life of pain. You want a life of whether it's happiness or joy or pleasure or something good, something, you want a life with values. And the less and less that's possible, I think the more in which your sort of world becomes bad, and you have to adapt to it to have a better life. But what I mean is when it becomes metaphysical, if you think that life is, what was that from The Princess Bride? Life is pain, Highness, right? So it's, if you think that life in general is predominantly a place of pain and suffering, or as Marcus Aurelius put, a sojourn far from home, that it's mainly about suffering. And you need a philosophy to help you cope with it, not just some psychological techniques. So
why do you think this metaphysical idea of life is suffering is so predominant even today? I mean, you can understand it in ancient times when life really was miserable and short and brutish, but nowadays in many modern societies, that psychology and that philosophy still permeates the culture. Why?
I don't have the answer to that. I don't know. I'd have to think about that. But what's interesting about the ancient world too, because so people will often bring this up, if you say, well, look, if you read Marcus Aurelius, it's in a way like the Meditations, it's in a way, it has a nobility to it. When you read the book, it has where you can respect him. And yet there's a real sadness to the book. And those kind of go together. And what I think sad a bit is that, so Marcus Aurelius' philosophy is that everything that happens in accordance with fate, which they equate with God's will. And that the universe is organized and structured, and every event happens providentially for the sake of the good, both for man and for the sake of the whole. So we should welcome piously everything that happens with cheerfulness, as coming from God, as being good, as being, and yet the book is pervaded with sadness, I think, and futility. And there's something philosophical about that, but I think also something psychological. It's about Marcus himself and what his life was like. I mean, he lost a lot of children, and he was emperor, but he had a lot of suffering in his own life. But it couldn't be attributable, I think, just to, well, it's the ancient world and, life was harder then and so on, because you don't find this in Aristotle. It's not, life is pain, steel yourself against suffering, make yourself invulnerable, pull into the inner citadel where you can't be hurt. It's not about, there's more ambition in Aristotle. There's more of a sense that the ambitiousness about character is not an internalized inner citadel. The emphasis on character is about building someone who's going to go live in the world, so he doesn't have that sort of, I hesitate to call it pessimism, but there's some kind of a sense that the world is a place where you should expect hurt and suffering.
I'm sorry, this is great. I just want to keep pursuing this a little bit, because I feel like what's making Stoicism so popular nowadays, and as Nikos alluded to, guys like Jordan Peterson, is that they're answering a need out there, a tremendous need. As I said, this concept of life as suffering sort of permeates society. In what way can objectivists deal with this very real problem? Because it's a problem. We just can't say, look, it's about life, it's not about suffering. Suffering is just not important. We have to just look beyond it and talk about life. How can we as objectivists deal with people who are suffering and need an answer for this problem?
Well, there's a couple of things I want to say about that. One, suffering is something one needs to deal with. But the question is, what does a philosophy have to say about it? And I think that primarily is two things. It's ethics and metaphysics. So, I mean, from the perspective of ethics, when people are suffering, whereas it's not the case where, you had someone close to you die, and like these things happen in life. You wanted to get that job and you didn't get it, and now you feel down. These are ups and downs psychologically that everyone has to deal with, whether you're Ayn Rand or Jordan Peterson, but just this is part of life. It's an aspect of life. But the issue that what Objectivism would say is, but don't think that's the essence of life. That this is something that you need to really make your worldview orient itself around that problem. Like that's the problem to solve. And then when you bring in techniques and perspectives and stuff to help you solve that problem from the perspective of Objectivism, it's no, life is the problem to solve. Actually living your life, pursuing and obtaining the kind of values that actually support, sustain, enrich your life. In that way, it's ambitiously oriented toward life and positive values, not simply toward one's character to help you cope with life. It's not a philosophy of coping. It's a philosophy of achievement. And it's hard to exactly put your finger on that, but there's something very much where it's oriented toward coping techniques. And there's a metaphysics underlying that, at least implicitly. There's a sense that what you need in life is coping mechanisms for what life will throw at you. And that is so opposite from the perspective of Objectivism. There's joy, happiness, pride, achievement, love, things that you can actually go after and just secure in life. And your whole orientation to be, how do I obtain those? How do I obtain what life has to offer? How do I suck everything out of life I can? Versus how do I protect myself? And this is not to say that people interested in Stoicism are not interested in things in life, but there's a difference in orientation. So what Objectivism might have to say, and it depends on the person and their suffering, is to investigate, like we don't have a hack, because I don't think philosophy can work with, hacks and tips, what are their actual values? What are they pursuing? What do they think is worth pursuing? Like I would have to talk to somebody. I couldn't just simply write a book. I would have to be like, well, what are you after? And you might find that they're after things that don't make any sense, or that their goals are contradictory, or that they simply just in a position in life where they don't know what they want, and you can offer them some kind of guidance. But
do you think that part of the appeal of Stoicism and Jordan Peterson is they have hacks? In other words, it seems like philosophy isn't an easy solution, because you have to introspect, you have to really unpack your feelings to find the values that are causing these feelings. And people just maybe aren't willing to do that kind of work. Maybe they don't know that, or don't feel that life is about that. So that's what makes these things more appealing than the philosophical solution, say the objectivist solution.
I mean, there's definitely something to the fact that philosophy is hard work. And also that you need to motivate philosophical thinking and see why that you need to keep digging deeper, and that there is an issue of, there's just an ease to say, well, if this is the problem, just take the cosmic perspective and simply step back and say, like, what does this matter? What does my petty concerns matter in the, when it comes to thinking about the whole? Okay, so I didn't get that job. Well, I'm not dead. Like, they kind of step back and like the universe doesn't care. You can have some tips and for things like that. And there's nothing wrong with tips or hacks, right? Because it's a short-term solution that gives you a quick response to a problem that you face. But for that to be, I think, lasting, or for you to know that that's the right approach to life, then you have to step back and you have to integrate. Like, so when I think about the life is pain, what it gives it a metaphysical warrant, a grounding to a certain approach to life. It says the universe is like this. So one of the things that, Ayn Rand does is she bases moral guidance on metaphysical facts that are true in the nature of things. Like, if these are the facts, if this is what is true in the nature of things, here is the guidance I'm offering you. if human beings are such and such, and the world operates like this, here's what you should do, right? And so Stoicism offers something like that, right? They say, what happens is fixed. What happens is for the best. Now, the most modern Stoics drop that whole providential, theological providentialism, God makes everything happen for the best. Most of them drop that. But if you have that perspective, then it gives a kind of a warrant to the person to say, well, when something happens to me, which I take to be a bad event, I can look on this and see it as good in the context of the whole. And I can get myself into a place where I can think, no, I've lost my child, but it was never mine to start with. God is simply taking it back.
So it's sort of Hamlet's orientation. There's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so.
Well, that's one of their lines, and I'd have to think about the Hamlet point, but it's not events that harm us; it's our judgments about events. So the idea, and there's something to that, but that's wrong. I think that's wrong. Actually, that's a statement that's flat out wrong. Yes. When a truck hits you and it smashes you, that's not your judgment about it. It's, but there is something to the idea that how you think about what has happened to you affects how much it affects you.
Yeah.
So if you think that the most important thing in life is reputation and other people don't think much of you, that's going to be a big deal. If you're Howard Rourke, if you don't care at all about what other people think about you in terms of your reputation, and he's unaffected by these things. So for sure, your judgments affect how much you're affected.
Okay,
I have so many questions, but I think we're at the end.
Well, let's try to get as many as we can. Yeah, Nikos.
I have one more question. It's kind of big. I'm not sure. Razi, let me know if we have 5 more minutes or we should move to Clubhouse. I could take this question to Clubhouse, but there's this whole category of Stoicism that we didn't touch upon, which is so interesting to me, which is this idea of, in a way, inviting hardship so as to prepare yourself for when the hardship comes. Razi, we have a bit more time, so I'll go with it. So the person that comes to my mind is someone like David Goggins, who is this ultra-marathon runner. He has destroyed his body in all possible ways throughout his life, but every time he comes back stronger. He wakes up early. He goes through suffering, and through suffering, he became a better person, a better version of himself compared to the self that he had and he didn't like. And something else that Stoics talk about is this idea of negative visualization. Negative visualization. This is try to imagine yourself without the things that you take for granted. So try to imagine from simple stuff. Try to imagine yourself without electricity, for example. Or like for 10 days, I'm in quarantine. I never realized how much I enjoyed even the fact of taking a walk outside. So from that very simple, like first world problem to something bigger. So on that book we were reading, Aaron, in OAC, there was a line that really stuck in my mind. It says, you realize that every time you talk to a friend, every time you make love, every time you listen to a song, it could be the last one. Hopefully it's not going to be the last one, but it could be. So it's this idea of memento mori, think that you will die. And the idea that in Stoicism is, we're not saying this to make your life futile. We're saying this so that you carpe diem, so to speak. You take everything out of life. So I threw 2 things on the table. One is inviting hardships, and it's not a coincidence that something else very popular in the self-development sphere is cold sours. There's something very Stoic in it, with cold sours, frozen sours. So people say
this is Wim Hof thing.
Yes. And you have some people like this guy who says it's a health thing, but you have other people who say even if it's not a health thing, it brings you, it centers you in the now. It makes you realize, let's say, that hardship is part of reality, and hardship makes you a better person. Anyway, I threw too much on the table. So hardships and negative visualization.
I think in both cases, the question, what it turns on, and you can separate this out from Stoicism and just think about the issue in general, whether these kinds of approaches to life are for health reasons, they're for staying in the moment, they're to be in compliance with Stoicism, they're just healthy. So we can just step back from Stoicism for a second. But when I read, so this is William Irvine's book. This is the one you were talking about, A Guide to the Good Life. Mm-hmm. And he talks a lot about negative visualization, imagining the worst that can happen, in effect, imagining you don't have the things that you have. I think a lot of this is, why are you doing this? So if it's really that on occasion, you remind yourself that, you know what, I actually have quite a bit. I'm complaining about all sorts of stuff that's not really going well. But you know what, actually I have it pretty well. I mean, like I could imagine myself, I'm not in this condo, I'm not in sunny Southern California, I don't have a job. I mean, I could imagine myself, and it's like, you know, count your blessings, man. You know, don't be a whiner, right? But that's really about bringing a perspective to take seriously and really appreciate the values you actually do have, you know. But the constant remind yourself that things could be worse, and it's the kind of always bring that to mind. I think there's something of that, what do you call it, sort of pessimistic worldview that you better constantly remind yourself of that, because it could be stripped away from you in an instant. And you have to take it, you know, and so just taking me psychologically, so this is just stepping out of philosopher and objectivism, just me as a human being. Every once in a while, I have a thought like that, right? Where, you know, or where you have a moment where you think, you know, it's actually pretty good, you know, what I've got now, and things could be a lot worse and stuff. But the idea that daily reminding yourself of that, I think, is too much, and it's really too much. And same with, well, so why are you always envisioning it could be worse? Appreciate what you have. Well, it could be better. So, you know, I used to be, as you guys know, I used to be a gymnastics coach, and one of the things that's common in sports is positive visualization, ideal visualization. So when you're looking down the runway for a vault or something, you know, the gymnasts in their head, they're focusing on, like, you know, this is how I'm going to nail it. And I think it's one thing to say, look, and people have health issues like this, where you thought you're going to have a heart attack and you didn't. And you think, well, there's so much I want to do in my life. You know, I should be doing things. I could die the next instant. That there's something healthy about that. But that you like live your life constantly reminding yourself of that, I think it's unnecessary. And I think it's an unhealthy focus on what could be negative. I would be focusing much more on what could be better. And not because you're unsatisfied and your life sucks. It's more that, no, but where could I be better? What do I want more from in life? I think it's more important to focus on that. And it's not to say it's irrelevant, like I said, or it's not important to count your blessings, so to speak. So let me say something about the voluntary discomfort, because that's another thing that Irvine talks a lot about. I find that frankly silly. Maybe that's not very nice to say. But that you would practice poverty, and for the same reasons, by the way, you practice poverty, right? Go outside without shoes. It's winter, don't wear a coat so you can be voluntarily uncomfortable. Don't take your car to work, ride the bus and get jostled around, and they have to wait at bus stops, and all your wait, it takes you a long time to get there. Induce suffering on yourself. What's the point? And the point is, well, to harden yourself against adversity. But that, again, that's that whole worldview that life is pain, and you have to harden yourself. You have to train yourself for that. And there could be some limited, so like, I'm not a Navy SEAL, right? So I don't need to like dive into ice water and just be prepared to focus on the mission and go without food for 72 hours. And it's like, I don't need to do that. And I don't view life as that's what you need to do to prep for it. What I need to prep for. Jump in.
A bit here, though. Okay. So personally, one of the experiences that really changed my life was the difficult months in the army, in the Presidential Guard. So this is something that I wouldn't want to go back and do again, but in a way I'm very thankful to, again, quote fate, that it happened, because it happened at the perfect time. It was just before I came to the UK, so it set me up in a way that nothing in the UK, working while studying and stuff, nothing was difficult after that, in a way. So And a lot of people don't have to go through this army service. So, but isn't this idea of getting out of your comfort zone and experiencing something which is difficult, something which is a challenge, and after that, everything is easier. So what's wrong with that? And if it works...
Well, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But it's nothing wrong with that. It's what's the philosophy behind it? So it's, I mean, you can have the same thing as you go to boot camp or something. If I can get through that, man, I can get through anything. And it doesn't have to be military. It doesn't have to be boot camp, but it's something hard. Like I think when I was wanting to go to college and stuff, I was living off $13 a week groceries because I had no money and I lived in some crummy little apartment somewhere with cockroaches. And it's like, but I went through that and I paid my way and I made it happen. And it's like, look, like I know what that means. I know what that's like, you know, and it's, you know, I can handle what life throws at me. Sure. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's no reason to look down on that. Because in some cases, the getting beyond your comfort zone can shows you what you're capable of. And you don't know what you're capable of until those zones are pushed. And when you push yourself outside of that, you say, wow, I didn't realize I was capable of that, but I can do it. And it gives you a greater sense of confidence in your ability to handle things as they come up, and a greater confidence in your ability in general, sure. But as a lifestyle, I wouldn't recommend that as a lifestyle. I mean, in part is because, again, the effort, the focus is just on, it's not, I don't really think in Stoicism, the focus is on, if you do something that's challenging and which you're not sure that you can do, and you do it, it'll help you better go out there in the world and achieve your values. Because the focus on Stoicism is not that you achieve your values. And that's another fundamental difference with Objectivism. Objectivism is about the achievement and enjoyment of values. And that means real world values, externals, as the Stoics would call them. Stoicism is not about whether you achieve anything. And the idea is to disconnect it from the actual achievement of it. It's your trying that matters. So it's the way you live, and it's the character from which the way you live flows. That's the focus. And as long as that is the case, you're like an archer. As long as you do everything to hit the target, you've done everything. And the hitting of the goal, that's sort of incidental. If it comes about, it comes about. But I think what life really requires is that you actually go and achieve your values. I mean, think about what it would be like to attain a virtuous character, however you conceive that. And yet you fail at all your endeavors. You never get a job. You never write code that works. You never heal anybody. You never win a race. I mean, literally, you fail at all your goals. You're not going to be happy. And you're not going to live. So, I mean, the Stoics' view is that virtue is a necessary and sufficient condition for happiness. All you need is virtue. That whether you actually achieve anything in life is irrelevant. It's kind of a nice to have. But if you got your character in order, that is all you need for eudaimonia. That's all you need for flourishing, well-being.
Well, do you think they say that because, well, that would be more easily attainable than something on the outside, some material value that you're not guaranteed, no matter how virtuous you are, to get, and to invest in something that you're not guaranteed to get will cause suffering?
Yeah,
right?
I think that's definitely part of the motive. But part of me wants to just say, so what? The achievement of values involves the possibility that you won't make it. That's a metaphysical fact. That's just true in life. Best intentions, best efforts doesn't mean success. Okay, that's a fact.
And is that
so
is that a Stoic attitude?
What's that?
Would that be a Stoic attitude? Since you're taking the nature of values and the nature of achievement, and you're saying, this is the nature of things, I have to deal with it as it is.
In part. So the part that I think is part of Stoicism is recognizing that one's best efforts don't guarantee success. That's true. But then the advice is to just focus primarily on your character and not on actual achievement. And technically, you shouldn't be concerned about the achievement.
Well, see,
I mean, yeah, go ahead.
I know from an actor's point of view, if I were to put this in the actor's perspective, the achievement of a scene is sort of like a Zen problem. The more you try to hit it, the farther away you're going to get. You really have to engage in process. You just have to be about process. I have to be in the moment with the other person and let what happens happen. And I probably will hit it if I leave myself alone and just stay in the process, as opposed to being obsessed with the end, obsessed with the end, obsessed with the end. And I feel like that very real human phenomenon is what people are seeking to avoid by investing in Buddhism or Stoicism or any sort of value system that puts ends and goals like that in a different perspective. It doesn't make
But notice the difference there, Mark. Your focus, what you want is the goal.
Yes.
I want to nail the scene. And one technique that I use to nail the scene is, if I'm thinking about, I've got to nail the scene, you're going to screw it up. So knowing that about myself, I adopt a certain kind of approach to it. And that helps me be more successful. But what you want is to nail the scene, not to try to nail the scene.
So it's still value forward. It's still trying to live, still trying to achieve an end.
You're not just trying to internalize the goal. And so long as, boy, Mark, you tried, you're fully happy with yourself. No, you're not, because the scene didn't go well. And it's like, no, but you want the scene to go well. Well, that's inshallah, God willing, and it's like, well, no. And you kind of go home and beat yourself up about it a little bit. Say, no, next time I need to think about how to do the scene better or whatever. So in that William Irvine book, he talks about somebody playing tennis. And part of the thing there's something true about it, is that your goal isn't what's going on in the athlete's mind is not when you're watching a backhand or something, the other player's backhand, and you're trying how to respond. You're totally in the moment. It's hit the ball, not I have to win this, right? Because that's not psychologically what you focus on. But his view is what you should do is internalize the goal, because if your goal is I'm going to try my best to win the match, but not invest myself in I want to win the match. It's good to win the match. It's a value to win the match, because you might not win it and then you'll be distressed. But as long as I can say, well, I tried my best, you should be fully happy with it. And that's an internalization of the goal, which I don't think makes sense. And I don't think it makes sense psychologically, because the tennis player actually does want to win the match. You want to do the scene well. But the focus is I'm out for a goal over which I don't have complete control. But so what? That's the nature of the goal. But I do want to achieve it. And I'm going to do what I can to do it. But it's not that you detach yourself from the actual goal and just focus on the processes.
Gentlemen, we need to move it to Clubhouse to continue the discussion there. But before that, something more about Aaron. So Aaron is one of the, as I said, fellows of the Ayn Rand Institute. You can find his writings in The New Ideal. And he has particularly something on Stoicism, which is called the false promise of Stoicism. So if you Google Aaron Smith Stoicism, you're going to find, first of all, some back and forth between Aaron and some Stoics who are not too excited with the objectivist view of the topic, but also particularly the article, the false promise of Stoicism. I also mentioned the Objectivist Academic Center, which is the 3-year program of the Ayn Rand Institute for those who want to really get into objectivism. So for me personally, I've said it many times, it made the difference from being an enthusiast, an objectivist enthusiast, to really getting into the objectivist movement and at least trying to speak from an objectivist viewpoint. So if you want to make this step to get a bit higher in your understanding, check the Objectivist Academic Center out. Before I joined, I thought I understood objectivism. After the first 2 classes, I realized no. It's like these people who watch martial arts videos on YouTube, and then they join a dojo and they go and roll with someone who knows what they're doing, and they realize, no, it's not that easy. Also, if you appreciate the work we are doing in the Ayn Rand Center UK, consider becoming a member. Membership starts from as low as £10 per month. You get access to many things. The Saturday Leonard Peikoff sessions, where we go through the Leonard Peikoff courses lecture by lecture with help of intellectuals who understand the content a bit better than we do. Usually we have James Valiant, we have guests, other guests there. The reading courses, we're finishing with the living. There's a next course which is going to be exciting, but I promised I'm not going to spoil anything. The WhatsApp groups and the productivity hub, and I'm sure there's more things that I'm missing. So for now, we move it to Clubhouse. Mark, Aaron, thank you very much. See you everyone in Clubhouse in 1 minute or two, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone.